held on 26 April 2023. So I can see that we have present Councillor Allison, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Barker. I have apologies from Councillor Calicis, and I'm aware that Councillor Horsham is substituting for Councillor Calicis, and I see that Councillor Horsham is present. Councillor Chalmers. Apologies, thank you. Appreciated. I see that Councillor Clark is here, Councillor Cooper is present, Councillor Dewar also, Councillor Fagan. No, nothing from Councillor Fagan, put down his apologies. I see that Councillor Gowland is present, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Keat and Councillor Lambie. I have apologies from Councillor Lockhart. I see that Councillor Loudon is present, as is Councillor Mars. Councillor McAdams, I have apologies from Councillor McAdams. I see that we have present Councillor Leslie MacDonald, Councillor Elaine McDougall, Councillor Mark McGeever, Councillor Nugent. Councillor Nugent I see is present. Councillor Razak. No, nothing from Councillor Razak at the moment. Councillor Robb is present, as is Councillor Ross. I have apologies from Councillor Salamati, and I'm aware that Councillor Frame is substituting for Councillor Salamati and is present at the meeting. I see that Councillor Scott is present. Councillor Thompson. No, nothing from Councillor Thompson. And Councillor Walker. No, nothing from Councillor Walker. There are a number of officers present at the meeting, and with that, Chair, I'll pass to you for the business of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Can I ask for any declaration of interest? I'm not seeing any, so we'll move swiftly on to item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting on pages 3 to 8 of your packs. Any comments? Not seeing anything, so with that, move on to item 3, pages 9 to 22 of your pack. It's climate change milestones and position statement, and I'd like to invite Kirsten Allen to speak.
Good morning. So I'm delighted to bring to committee a report outlining Scotland's ambitious climate change targets, and I can only apologise that the document isn't the one-page summary that had been originally requested by members, which I think is probably testament to how challenging and complex this policy and legislative landscape is when considering climate change in Scotland. So the purpose of this report is to inform the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee on the key milestones relating to Scotland's climate change and net zero ambitions, with Appendix 1 outlining the key milestones and Appendix 2 providing a South Lanarkshire Council position statement against the milestones which are deemed to be most within SLC's remit. Section 3 of the report provides a background on the legislative context in Scotland, including the statutory commitment for Scotland to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030, 90% by 2040, and a total reduction all from the 1990 baseline by 2045. And this is outlined by the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. As discussed in section 3.3, section 4.4 of the Climate Change Scotland Act states that a public sector body must, when exercising its functions, act as follows. Firstly, in the way best calculated to contribute to the delivery of Scotland's national emissions reduction targets. Secondly, to act in a way best calculated to help deliver Scotland's statutory climate change adaptation programme. And thirdly, act in a way that it considers is most sustainable. Furthermore, the Climate Change Public Duties Scotland Act places a legislative requirement on public bodies to report annually on compliance with climate change duties. And members will remember approving this report at committee on the 9th of November last year. Section 4 explains the format of the report, with Appendix 1, as discussed, relating to the key national milestones. It must be said, however, that the information detailed in Appendix 1 is not a completely exhaustive list, as there is a myriad of other policies and strategies. Instead, this list is deemed that the information are the key kind of categories which are instrumental to achieving Scotland's climate change ambitions. And these milestones have been divided into 7 themes. As you'll see within your copies, these 7 themes are as follows, and it's noted on the left-hand side of the table. So firstly, buildings, and then we go on to transport, waste, energy, agriculture and land use, biodiversity and nature, and then lastly, mitigation and adaptation. The milestones are listed within the next column on the table, with the columns on the right-hand side indicating the implementation level of said milestones, policies and strategies. The implementation level detailed is split between an organisational, area and national approach, and this has been decided through liaison with key departments and officers from across the council. A red symbol, which hopefully everyone can see in their copies, has been included for those milestones or targets which are deemed to place a sort of specific onus upon public bodies. For example, within Section 2.0, Milestone ID 2.1, all new buildings, including non-domestic buildings from 2024, are to use zero-emission heating and cooling systems, and this is when a building warrant has been applied for. So this directly places an onus upon South Lanarkshire Council to implement, hence the red symbol. The last column details cost-cutting policy or strategy documents as well. However, it probably is important for me to also circle back to the information noted within 3.3, which is that the Climate Change Act requires public bodies to act in a way which is deemed kind of best calculated to achieve emissions reduction targets. Therefore, it could be said that all targets are relevant for the council regardless of implementation level. Section 5, if we go on, refers to Appendix 2, and this is a high-level position statement which details the council's ongoing progress towards the national climate change milestones detailed in Appendix 1. And these position statements have been formed through consultation with key resources within the council, with most position statements responding to the milestones which we note with the red symbol which place that specific onus upon the council. Going on, Section 6 to 10 detail the other implications to be considered, and as always it should be noted that the financial implications of meeting national and global targets are significant, and all council services have a responsibility to commit to and implement actions to ensure these targets are met, with further actions on these targets also included within the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy action plans. So if I can just refer you back to the purpose of the report, the committee is asked to note the key climate change milestones in Appendix 1 and also the Council's current position statement against some of the milestones within Appendix 2. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Kirsten, for that. I'm quite glad it's not a one-page report. I thought it was quite useful information to have, and I'm sure members would agree with that. Can I open it up to any questions or comments from colleagues? Councillor Allison.
It's not been red ticked, if you like, but at 2.2 they're talking about low carbon heating systems. One of the things we've been doing in South Lanarkshire is putting in air source heating systems, which are not designed for retrofitting, but are also a lot more expensive. And when we're adding them to the social housing we have, it's increasing the heating costs quite significantly. Is that taken into account at all in what we're doing, or are we ignoring the cost in these situations to the tenants simply to make carbon climate targets?
Thanks, Alec. I'm sure we're not ignoring the cost of tenants at all. I'm absolutely sure that the Housing Technical Resources and others will be looking to support tenants in every way they possibly can. We're well aware of the financial burdens and stresses that everyone is under, and that we want to make sure that transition is in fact a just transition to net zero, and that the people who are most vulnerable to it are very much protected. I'm going to ask David. I'm going to ask Joanne to come in with some points.
Councillor Anderson, you're correct. We are aware of the impact that has on tenants of any changes that we make in the houses. That includes when we increase insulation. If people are not heating their homes, then you can create condensation. If we put in more expensive heating solutions, then that can affect ability to pay. So when we're looking at our programmes going forward, we're trying to create a balance. That means that we've taken all of these factors into account, and it's one of the reasons it's more complicated to implement the investment plans than simply to say there's a green energy solution, just put it in place. But we're very aware of the fuel poverty consequences of some of the technologies that are available, and we're hoping that some of the new technology that's coming along will give us more choice in terms of how we invest.
Thank you very much. Alec, would you like to come back in?
Well, yeah, it's good to hear what Joanne's saying, that they are looking into it, but I think we need to be a little bit more, a little stronger in that. I think it's unfair in the social housing to increase their costs at this time. And we need to have a real go at finding out better outcomes for achieving heating systems that aren't fossil fuel based. You're quite correct. That is acceptable, but it's unacceptable that we're putting tenants in a difficult position, because I've certainly got reports of them turning their heating off because they can't afford it, and that leads to the problems that Joanne was talking about as well. So I don't think continually just putting in these air source heating systems is acceptable.
Thanks, Alec. I'm more than happy to look into that and to share any information I get on it. I'm aware that broadly across the country there's also issues about how they're used and the understanding of how they're used, and that may well be a factor. But certainly if there's anything we can do to help, I'll be more than happy to explore that. Cheers. Can I go to Ralph Barker? Ralph.
Can you hear me okay? I haven't had the same reports as my fellow ward councillor, Councillor Allison, in that most of the air source that I've known about actually replaced all electric, if you can understand that. Most of our houses are off grid, so they are not on gas. What I seemed to get was it did reduce costs compared to the direct electricity, and that the houses were warmer. And the only complaints I've come across, and obviously, you know, it's a big subject, I might have missed a lot, was on the very coldest day, some of the air source didn't work on the very, very coldest day. But I've generally had good reports, so I'm surprised at that. The problem will come when we are replacing gas, when we're replacing fossil fuel with air source. I think that's when the problems will come. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Ralph. Would you like to respond at all? Thank you. Sorry, my fault.
Right.
There you go.
The councillor's correct in that the implications of any system depend on the house construction, the house type, where it's located, and the cost to the tenant depend on the type of fuel they had previous. And it's getting a balance for all of that. So when we're developing our investment programmes, we're not saying one shoe fits all. We're looking to see what's appropriate to that locality and that type of house.
Thank you very much. Kirsten, would you like to come in?
Okay. Thanks very much for the report. I think it goes to show that sustainability cuts across all departments, and that every committee needs to be thinking about this, and we can't have silo thinking, and that all spend must be fully aligned towards meeting these targets as well. And it also highlights what the United Nations leaders saying, that we have to do everything everywhere all at once now to meet these targets. My question is, I'd like to know a bit more, not necessarily now, but maybe a future report, where South Lanarkshire area and South Lanarkshire Council are at against some of these targets, so we can quantify the task that we have ahead of us. So that's just maybe a request for a future report to get some figures on where we're at now and so we know the level of task that we need to tackle.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. Yeah, would you like to come in? Other Kirsten.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kirsten. Yeah, I think that when we first this was the first step on this journey to kind of understanding where our policies and things like that and our plans are against this. So happy to take that away and work on that, of course. It is quite a complicated methodology to carbon accounting and understanding our policies and plans as a whole, but we'll certainly write that down as an action going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got David would like to come in.
Yep. Thanks very much, Councillor McGeever, and thanks very much, Councillor Robb. Yeah, we'll come back to that point. I think what we'll do, we'll start to highlight within that some of the financial consequences of making this journey, because they are really, really significant, and given where the council sits in its own financial position, it would be incredibly difficult to complete that journey with the resources we have at our disposal. So that may be helpful information if we bring that forward. Thanks.
Thanks very much, David. Councillor Lambie. Ross, on you go.
Bit of experience because I've got a ground source heat pump, which is basically the same thing as an air source heat pump. So the main challenge when we're talking about large scale rollout of heat pumps is that currently all energy supplies to houses are split in two. Half of the energy required for a dwelling comes from gas or oil. The other half comes from the electricity grid. And now we're putting all the pressure onto the grid. And when you install large heat pumps, you've got to notify your district network operator, and they have to go and check the cabling, not just of your premises and your head end, but all the way back to the exchange, the transformers, etc. So I just wondered if we have, as a council, when we're rolling out these kind of policies, have had discussions with the district network operator and asked them if we convert 5,000 properties over and ditch gas and change them to electric. Is the grid ready? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Joanne for an answer on that.
Thank you, Chair. To say the grid is ready for every property to be all electric, no, it's not. We do have discussions regularly with utility companies. We are aware of the geographies that have the greatest pressure, and that influences some of our choices and decisions, or the timing of some of our choices and decisions. And it's something we will be increasing. It's not just about energy grid, but as we're going forward, we're also having issues with the water infrastructure and other infrastructures in the area. So these do all factor in, and the councillor is correct that you can't always deliver what you want in the areas you want to.
Thanks very much. It's reassuring certainly hear the discussions are underway wherever necessary, and we appreciate the scale of the task, so thank you. We've got no further requests to speak, so with that I'm going to ask committee to agree the... Oh, hold on, one's come in, so I'll allow a last question. Councillor Keat.
The late timing of the question. Milestone 4.8 highlights the implementation of the deposit return scheme, and it says it'll be completed by 2023. Does the council have any knowledge as to when we're likely to see this implementation, and will there be any specific onus on the council to facilitate this?
I'm going to pass to David Booth.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Councillor. This report was compiled before the recent announcement that the deposit return scheme will be delayed and implemented at a later date. So what we're doing is we're currently kind of trying to get an understanding of what that means in terms of our actions, and we'll come back with a future report on its implementation, either to this committee or to Community Enterprise Resources Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That is something that's frequently brought up at the APSI group as well. So I know that councils across the country will be working with the government to implement what comes forward as soon as possible. With that, I'm going to ask committee to agree the report. To agree to note the report, I should say. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4, which is current energy efficiency and sustainability standards within the new council properties, pages 23 to 30 of the packs, and I'm going to invite Stephen Turner to speak on it.
Good morning. The purpose of this report is to advise the committee on the current energy efficiency and sustainability standards achieved within the council's new build, domestic and non-domestic properties. Section 3 gives a bit of the background, identifying that we're responsible for over 25,000 domestic properties, over 500 non-domestic properties. And as we go through in there, there's different funding streams for the various types for new builds. So from the housing perspective, existing tenant rental income, prudent borrowing and Scottish Government grant. And from non-domestic, could be various government policies and monies made available at the time, supplemented with the council's capital programme. Section 3.3 gives a few ideas of the key strategies and plans that link in to the sustainability agenda. Priority 5 of the Council's Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy 22-23 sets out some key actions that we need to look at to be building into new builds, making them climate resistant for the future. Our local housing strategy, 22-27, again sets out existing actions to look at to increase the proportion of council houses that meet the higher standards that have been set out by IS2. IS2 currently is under review, but we're expecting something later on this year to give realignment. Within the Council Strategic Housing Investment Plan, there's a number of actions there working alongside other landlords within the local area to try and improve and incorporate higher levels of energy efficiency, particularly carbon dioxide emissions and space heating. And for the non-domestic properties, our corporate asset management plan aims to create an efficient, fit for purpose and sustainable core estate within the limitations of existing budgets and resources. Section 3.4 gives some detail of the council motion that Councillor Robb had brought forward at the full council meeting on the 1st of December, and saying that there'll be a response to committee on the 14th of June. So moving on to section 4, which actually says what current standards are we currently incorporating into our new build properties. So within there, again, you'll see in line with current guidance, grant conditions and budget assumptions, new council homes have been built to the bronze level of sustainability, with certain aspects achieving silver standard. You'll see within the appendix in there that lays out the various parts within the building standards and the various criteria that are in there, and gives an example of a typical new build council property and the sustainability label that's contained there within. And you'll see in there that there's a number of aspects. It's not just carbon dioxide emissions or energy for space heating. There's a whole series that are under that sustainability umbrella. So you can see, an illustration of those standards. So bronze is the base level of sustainability, but we try and achieve higher standards where there's funding available to go to those higher objectives. And wherever there are opportunities to increase more aspects going beyond the bronze to silver, or perhaps in the future even higher, will depend on availability of grant and resource that's available. There's a detail there in 4.4, which I think was quite an astounding statistic in there, that the inflation in builds for particularly social housing increased by 22.4% over the last year. Already tight budgets. We've got some ambitious targets to introduce new housing. At the same point, there's a squeeze from construction for these properties. The new building standards that will be introduced in June this year will, again, there'll be cost impacts, for some other parts coming in for registered social housing, for fire suppression systems. Again, that's an additional cost, that's been laid on year. But overall, our new builds will meet EPC Band A or B. IS2, as it currently stands, should say that by 2032, all our properties should be trying to get as close as possible, based on resources available and based on technical feasibility, to Band B or better. So we're currently designing to that standard just now. We're not putting a legacy for the future that we have to go in and then retrofit these properties. Section 5 goes a bit further now in introducing the non-domestic. We don't have major non-domestic builds underway now. The last main programme was a school modernisation programme between 2004 and 2019. I've taken out a few pieces from that school modernisation programme, which I think are some main highlights around sustainability and energy efficiency models. 47% of our new build primary and nurseries have solar panels, which power approximately 5% of the actual use within those sites. 38% of our new primaries have low carbon intensity biomass fossil fuel. Now, this is a way before we were aware that there was going to be zero emissions heat sources coming in place for the vast majority of those sites. So the design teams are already at that stage. We're looking at how can we get away from gas? How can we make the intensity or the carbon intensity of our heating systems less? And that was incorporated in 38% of our properties, and a further 11% of our new primary schools are either heated by air source or ground source, which again, I think this council was one of the early adopters in such of these large school sites, which I think overall has gone really well and has shown ambition in those areas that have been off gas grid. So again, for the future in there, again, you'll hear, and David mentioned just before introducing this paper, a lot of sustainability is proportional, unfortunately, to the amount of resource, financial resource that's available. But where there are opportunities to go to those higher standards, colleagues in design are designing to those higher standards where possible. The LEAP programme, I believe, the Learning Estate Investment Programme, which colleagues in education secured some funding for Newton Fareham primary extension. And again, that's something in there where the council still have to get the upfront capital costs, but by perhaps investing in the higher standards at that earlier stage, are able to see a payment at the end of each of the 25 years, provided that those performance targets are met. So again, EPC Band A for those properties, which is between 67 and 80 kilowatt hours per annum. We have to monitor each year the performance of those sites to ensure that the annual cash flows come through. So again, it's another opportunity, to look at how can we, with constrained finances, try and look at the future to try and safeguard our properties. So next stages. So I've already said building regulations seem to change so often now. There's another amendment coming in June this year, whereas Kirsten had mentioned, we're moving to new properties will no longer be able to be heated with direct emission heating systems. Now, again, I'm fairly new to this particular area and a lot of the terms around there, but effectively we wouldn't be able to burn something within our properties. So we could use electricity, which is generated off-site, and that's probably been seen as being the key objective. It was mentioned earlier about air source and ground source. Again, when it comes to that, we do have experience. We've got over 1,600 retrofitted air source heat pumps. And again, as Joanne had mentioned earlier on, and Councillor Allison's concern was about cost. That is something that has to be fundamental. We cannot be putting people into fuel poverty by transitioning systems, and that won't be the case. The only systems that have been in place have either been solid fuel or full electric, as was mentioned by one of the other councillors within there, because at this moment in time, gas is still far cheaper, although from the carbon perspective and our net zero perspective, I know it's a no-no for the future, but we have to be careful when we're looking at that. We could be building properties, new build properties where with air source or ground source, which is far more expensive on a capital basis. I'm sure that through time, as we go along the pathway, costs will fall, as skills improve, as technology improves. But just now there's a huge capital investment, and I think Councillor Lambie had mentioned in there about the constraints in the gas grid. Yes, we are in touch with Scottish Power Energy Networks who control the grid. Scottish Power's idea for the future is that they will double. The grid will have to double between now and 2050 at least. But we're in consultation at this moment in time with Scottish Power. They want to know where our priorities lie in the future, and there's some good dialogue there. So development of a planning-led design residential design guide is detailed within the local housing strategy for developers in South Lanarkshire that encourage higher sustainability standards for new domestic buildings. And we have to look again, as we say, that the changing landscape around legislation. Probably be aware that the further proposals, Alex Rowley introduced the private members bill last year, which at the beginning of this year, Patrick Harvey announced that the Scottish Parliament was going to be taken forward by the Scottish Government over the next 2 years to introduce a new proposed domestic buildings environmental standards bill. So again, we have to look at what comes out of that proposal to see how we then incorporate that into our own planning and design process. And 6.3 highlights that we will continue to maximise opportunities within the non-domestic and domestic portfolio, including identifying appropriate funding where possible. So overall, just going back now to the recommendations. The committee is asked to approve the following: that the current energy efficiency and sustainable standards achieved within the Council's new domestic and non-domestic building stock properties be noted. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Stephen. I'm going to go first to Katie Loudon and invite any other members who wish to comment or ask questions to indicate so now. Cheers. Katie.
Thanks very much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. I was particularly interested to hear and read the stuff around 5.2 about schools. Obviously, we've had the huge schools modernisation programme, and really just to hear a bit more detail about how we're essentially looking towards moving away from gas completely, if that's possible. A question around that was that we're very much talking about heating schools there, and obviously schools will use gas for other purposes, like cooking, for example, in the kitchens. And I wondered if any consideration had been given to looking at that at this stage just now, whether we'd eventually have to have an eye towards looking at cooking, I was going to say cooking equipment. I think the words I'm looking for is stoves and ovens as well, which are currently in place with an eye towards sort of moving away from gas there as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Loudon. I'm going to go to Kevin Carr to comment on that and answer your question. Kevin.
Chair, and thanks for the question. It's a good question. We actually do have a couple of primary schools that work in convection stoves at the moment, and there's pros and cons for doing that. You know, the pros obviously are, you know, long term it will meet our obligations to do with our net zero targets. The cons are sometimes they're not as efficient as the gas stoves, but we do have them in some of our newer primary schools, and it is something we're looking at over the longer term, you know, as it looks like gas will be phased out, but looking at alternatives for that as well. But as I said, I think it's 3 primary schools that we currently have convection stoves in.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Katie, would you like to come back in that? Sorry, I clicked the button that I think stops you from speaking. So, no, in that case, I'm going to go to Katie. Yeah, there you go.
You know, it was okay, thanks. So
Cheers.
Complicated this. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, and slightly different system here in this room than we use in the other one. So thanks for your understanding. Kirsten.
Thanks for the report, Stephen. Really useful background to how we move forward as well. Just wanted to understand a bit more about the process of how we weigh up the whole life costs of a building. For example, are there opportunities, say, to borrow a wee bit extra in capital so that we then get the benefit of drastically reduced energy bills in the future, if that's taken into account in the process of design, so that we can get higher standards, but we'll reap the benefits over the whole life cycle of the project. Thank you.
Joy? That's fine.
Yeah, we're going to go to Joanne. Thanks.
Sorry, I can't see the screen, so we do look at whole life costing when we have a programme, and when we were doing the schools programme, that was part of it. But obviously we talk about our new schools, but some of them are 25 years old now, so the technology and the standards have moved on. We do have a life cycle programme for investment in the education to keep the schools up to standard. And when we are looking at how to invest in that, at the moment, we're focusing on fabric. We're focusing on how we can improve the efficiency of the building rather than looking at just the heating source, for example. So we are looking at cladding, we're looking at windows, we're looking at insulation. So as every school's coming up for investment, we are taking all these things into account. So we've just literally in the last 18, 24 months started that life cycle reinvestment, because the schools have reached that age for dealing with that. And we do liaise with colleagues in finance about what we think we need each year. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'd just like to say on that myself, actually, that I think it's important the public know that the council is committed, and I think we all are committed to going as quickly and as effectively as possible with this. Obviously, it's, I think it is a great thing that 47% of our new primary schools have solar panels already installed. But to give a bit of context, I think, it's important that we remember that this is a technology that is advancing all the time, and until very recently wasn't as either as effective at producing electricity or as reliable when the sun wasn't shining, or as cost effective in return for the initial investment. It was maybe more expensive than it is now to do so. So there will be continuous improvements made, I'm sure. The council is, and the current administration actually is very keen to invest where we can to save money on bills in future. But ultimately that investment is limited by what's possible in the financial climate, and for reasons that we all know and won't go into. But certainly I think it's important that the public know that the council as a whole is very much committed to exploring any opportunity to do as much as we possibly can in this regard. So thank you, and thank you very much for the report, Stephen. With that, I've got no further requests to speak, so I'm going to ask the committee to agree to note the report. Thank you very much. I've no indications of urgent business, and I have none. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for their attendance and participation and bring the meeting to a close. Thank you. Cheers for your help, as always.